welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel, whichever one it may be. And if you are new here, please feel free to like, subscribe, comment, and do all those wonderful things. We are back today with the next version of Fables, Myths, and Legends. Yes, it's finally here. Anyway, I'm going to be working on this picture of a cookie today. And while I work on it, I'm going to be using this wax and this putty from Randa's Crafty Corner. And this pen from Jim's Handmade Pen Shop. And this tray from somewhere. I can't remember where, and I didn't want to look it up because it's been a while. I've had it a while. Anyway, why don't you grab your own whip or just settle back, relax, pull up a chair, whatever makes you comfortable, and let's go ahead and get into the next legend.
It's time to pack up our stuff and head out. It was fun learning about vampires, but time to explore new things. The next legend we are learning about is a doozy. First, though, we have a 2-hour and 14-minute drive up to Logan International Airport in Boston, Massachusetts. Then we board a 6-hour and 48-minute flight to London, United Kingdom. After landing in London, we get to board a train that's 1 hour and 48 minutes to our final destination of Nottingham, UK. We will rent a room at a bed and breakfast and stay a while, enjoying some of the local sights and, of course, going to visit Sherwood Forest and learn more about the legend of Robin Hood. Before we get into the history behind Robin Hood, let's go ahead and read a summary of The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, the book that I'm currently reading. So let's begin. During the reign of King Henry II in England, 18-year-old Robin goes into a fight on the way to an archery competition, accidentally killing a forester. Robin hides from the vengeful sheriff of Nottingham in Sherwood Forest. Over time, other outlaws join him, and he becomes the leader of their band. They vow to help others who have been unfairly oppressed or are in need, and they do so by taking from those who have wronged these people. As Robin Hood becomes more notorious in Nottingham, the sheriff attempts to catch him, but always fails, realizing that he cannot outsmart Robin Hood. The sheriff gives up on his aim of catching the outlaw. When the sheriff holds an archery competition, Robin's right-hand man, Little John, participates in disguise. The sheriff is so impressed that he invites Little John into his service. Little John accepts and enjoys the life of leisure while working for the sheriff. However, he begins to miss his friends in Sherwood Forest and returns, having stolen the sheriff's silver. Robin Hood chastises Little John for stealing from someone who did not wrong him. Little John brings the sheriff into Sherwood Forest, where Robin returns the silver. While Little John goes on an errand, Robin Hood follows him, assuming that he will get off course. Robin watches as Little John fights with a tanner named Arthur of Bland, who beats Little John. Robin Hood is impressed by Arthur and invites him to join their band. As the three continue walking through the forest, they meet a man dressed in fancy clothing and attempt to rob him. However, they discover he is Robin Hood's nephew, on the run from the law after accidentally killing his father's steward. Robin renames his nephew Will Scarlet and invites him to join their band. The four men then come upon a miller whom they play a trick on, pretending to rob him. However, the miller outsmarts them, temporarily blinding them by throwing flour into their faces. Once Robin Hood reveals himself, the miller joins their band as well. Later, the band finds a minstrel named Alan Adale, whose love, Ellen, is about to marry someone else. Robin pledges to help Alan and Ellen. He finds a friar who will marry them, Friar Tuck, and interrupts the wedding ceremony. Alan and Ellen are married, and Friar Tuck joins Robin Hood's band. One day, Robin Hood meets a knight, Sir Richard of Lee, who is improvised after pawning his land to the prior of Emmet to save his son from jail. Robin steals from the wealthy bishop of Hereford, who Little John forcefully brought to Sherwood, and uses the money to buy back Sir Richard's land from the greedy prior of Emmet. Sir Richard pledges his loyalty to Robin Hood. Another day, while in search of adventure, Little John dresses as a friar. He meets two friars at an inn and taunts them during their travels before stealing from them. Meanwhile, Robin Hood trades clothes with a beggar and robs 4 other beggars, who are feigning various ailments. Later, he meets a corn dealer who is known to cheat those in need, whom he also robs. Having gained notoriety as well as respect for his archery skills, Robin Hood is invited to participate in an archery competition by Queen Eleanor. He attends, though King Henry is furious when Robin Hood wins. The king promises the queen that he will grant Robin Hood a pardon for 40 days, but he sends his men after Robin while Robin is on his way back to Sherwood. Having been warned by the queen's page, Robin Hood and his men split up. His men make it back to Sherwood Forest, but Robin finds all roads to Sherwood blocked. He meets Sir Richard, who advises Robin Hood to ask the queen for mercy. He makes this request, and Queen Eleanor allows Robin to return to Sherwood unharmed. After a few years, King Henry dies and is succeeded by King Richard. Robin Hood ventures out of Sherwood for the first time in many years and encounters an outlaw, Guy of Gisborne, who has been sent by the sheriff to catch Robin Hood. Robin kills Guy of Gisborne and dresses in his clothes. He goes to an inn where the sheriff is waiting for him. There, Little John is set to be hanged for releasing 3 men who were to be killed for poaching the king's deer. Robin Hood calls his men, and they save Little John. A few months later, King Richard visits Nottingham, and he and his men go in search of Robin Hood, dressed as friars. They meet Robin in Sherwood Forest and reveal themselves after an archery contest. Robin Hood offers a place in his service. King Richard offers a place in his service to Robin Hood and his men, which they accept. After King Richard dies, Robin Hood returns to Sherwood Forest, where he intends to remain. However, the new king is unhappy about Robin's departure and sends the sheriff after him. Robin Hood kills the sheriff and then becomes ill. He asks his cousin, a nun, to heal him. However, his cousin is afraid of being punished by the king and so cuts open a vein leading to Robin's heart. Little John comes to Robin Hood after hearing his horn. He helps Robin shoot one last arrow and look out on Sherwood Forest before dying in Little John's arms. And now we are going to read the story from from Robin Hood and the Monk, which is the first depiction of Robin Hood that is known to have been written. Little John talks of the May morning, but Robin Hood is still unhappy because he cannot go to Mass or Matins. He decides to go to a service in Nottingham, inspired by his devotion to the Virgin Mary. Much the miller's son, advises him to take at least 12 men. He refuses and goes with only Little John. On the way, he makes a bet with Little John, loses, and refuses to pay when they cannot agree on the payout. Little John leaves him. Robin goes to St. Mary's in Nottingham and prays. A monk whom he had robbed sees him and tells the sheriff, who gathers a group of many men to arrest Robin. Robin fights them off with a 2-handed sword, wounding many and killing 12 of the sheriff's men. His sword breaks while fighting the sheriff, and he runs into the church in an attempt to escape. The text breaks off at this point. There's a page missing that presumably described Robin's capture and the news reaching his men. The story continues with the men's shock, and Little John being the only one to keep his wits about him. He declares they must rescue him. They catch the monk riding with a little page. Little John kills the monk for his role in Robin's capture, and Much kills the page so that the page cannot spread word of the ambush. Little John and Much go to the unnamed king with the monk's letter and tell him the monk died on the way. The king gives them gifts and directions to bring Robin Hood to him. Little John brings the letters to the sheriff and tells him that the monk did not come because the king had made him an abbot. They get into the prison, kill the jailer, and escape with Robin. The sheriff does not dare face the king. Robin says that Little John has done him a good turn in return for the ill one he played and offered to be his man. Little John still wants to remain his master, or still wants him to remain his master. The king is enraged that the men managed to fool him, but admits that Little John is the most loyal man in England, and since they were all fooled, lets it go. And that is two of the stories of Robin Hood. Kind of similar to what we know and love today, but maybe not as much as you originally thought. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the history behind Robin Hood. The legend of Robin Hood. Robin Hood is a legendary heroic outlaw who is most known for robbing from the rich to give to the poor. He is a highly skilled archer and swordsman. In some depictions of him, he is a nobleman. In others, he is a yeoman, which basically stands for commoner. He is sometimes written as fighting in the Crusades alongside King Richard. In these stories, he returns to find his land has been taken by the Sheriff of Nottingham. While we will discuss these characters more later on, we will mention them here since they are a part of the whole story. We have Maid Marian, Robin's love interest, the merry men, including Little John and Will Scarlet, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Prince John, and King Richard. The start of a legend. The first known writing of Robin Hood came from the 15th century, but there have been many variations and adaptations dating back earlier than that. The story of Robin Hood is considered one of the best-known tales of English folklore. The legend and historical context have been around for centuries. Although a content of debate, it has been proposed he may have been a real person. Historical figures with similar names have been proposed as possible evidence of his existence, some of these people having existed in the late 13th century. Historians and folklorists have also come around to the fact that the term Robin Hood may have just been used in reference to bandits and outlaws. The first reference of Robin Hood is from a poem called Piers Plowman that was written in the 1370s. I tried reading this poem, and while I got the gist of it, I could only vaguely figure out what the reference was. Also, Old English is hard to read. Other works from the time period may have referenced him as well. They may also have referenced other heroes from the time, though. The first surviving written copies of the narrative ballads that tell his story date to the second half of the 15th century, or first part of the 16th century. These accounts set the stage for the story we know, that he is a skilled archer and swordsman, his partisanship of the lower class, his special regard for women, his anti-clericalism, and his animosity towards the Sheriff of Nottingham. Little John and Will Scarlet also appear in these tellings. However, Maid Marian and Friar Tuck do not appear until much later. Robin's loyalty to the King Richard. In early tellings of the story, Robin Hood was set in the time of King Edward II, but I also saw Edward IV mentioned. The king in these stories is only mentioned in passing and not an actual part of the story. Round about the 16th century, Robin's story changed to be set in the time of King Richard I, who is also known as Richard the Lionheart. In these stories, Robin is loyal to King Richard and even joins him in the Crusades. Robin's social status also seems to change depending on the story. In early accounts, Robin is a yeoman. He is basically a commoner. In later tellings, his status was elevated to a higher ranking. He is sometimes referenced as the Earl of Huntingdon. Up to this point, we have been primarily seeing ballads, or up until this time frame. These are spoken songs or poems about Robin Hood. The first surviving text, handwritten story of Robin Hood is from the 15th century. This story is Robin Hood and the Monk. This story contains many of the elements we know to date, as the classic Robin Hood story, the Nottingham setting, and his animosity to the sheriff. The first printed version of the story, written sometime in the 16th century, is A Jest of Robin Hood. This is a collection of stories gathered together in an attempt to unite the tales into a continuous narrative. The next known story is Robin Hood and the Potter. This story brings a new tone to the story that's different than that of the monk. Robin Hood and the Monk is considered to be more of a thriller, while Robin Hood and the Potter is more of a comedy. This new plot relied more on trickery and cunning on Robin's part, where previous tellings of the story used straightforward force. The Jest has a completely different plot from the two. Each of these three works survived in only a single copy. The classic theme of Robin Hood is that he robs from the rich to give to the poor. His theme, however, wasn't actually part of the story until 1592, which is mentioned in John Stow's Annals of England. Previous tellings of the story, this isn't mentioned and isn't even believed to be a major part of the story. It's always been believed, though, that he is on the side of the poor. The stories were written by the gentry, and Robin Hood himself was a yeoman, so it is possible he was only sympathetic to the peasants, but did not have the same political views. It was only due to his pious, generous, and courteous nature that he helped people from any class. The May Day celebration and Robin Hood. May Day is a festival of ancient origins, marking the beginning of summer, usually celebrated on May 1st. Festivities include creating and dancing around the maypole, weaving floral garlands, gathering wildflowers and green branches, and crowning a May Queen. In some regions, they even have bonfires. Robin Hood's association to May Day began in the early 15th century. It was common during May Day celebrations for people to dress as Robin Hood, or one of his merry men. Those dressed as Robin Hood and his men would play games depicting the tales of Robin Hood. During the reign of Henry VIII, it was even briefly popular at court, where a person would be chosen as Robin Hood, the May King, and host the festivities. Maid Marian and Friar Tuck were both introduced at May Day celebrations. The two appeared together in some tellings, with the friar being a lustful problem towards Marian and having to be saved by Robin, or where Robin saves Marian from a lustful knight and the friar marries them. These games were used as a means of making money for the church. While they were written down, they aren't full renditions. I suspect these games were acted out for a crowd upon reading it. Upon reading it, I got the impression this was more similar to modern-day LARPing. It just sounded like fairgoers engaged in a game portraying characters from the tales. Robin Hood's story moves to the stage. There are many plays based upon Robin Hood, with playwrights taking ideas from the three earlier works, The Monk, The Jest, and The Potter. The plays also moved Robin's story to the 1190s, which was when King Richard was crowned, he was the king, and he was off fighting in the Crusades. This storyline was first proposed by John Major in his play Historia Majoris Britannia, written in 1521. William Shakespeare also makes reference to Robin in his work, The Two Gentlemen of Verona. The London theatre's closing in 1642 interrupted the portrayal of Robin Hood on stage. When the theater reopened again in 1660, Robin Hood did not return. At the end of the 19th century, Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote the play The Foresters. It is based on the jest, with the change of being set in the time of King Richard, taking place while King Richard is away fighting in the Crusades. It includes the sheriff and Prince John as the antagonist, with Prince John rivaling Robin for Maid Marian's hand. The king returns, and Robin gets Marian, giving the story a happy ending. The printing press changed the ways the tale was put forth. Previously, they were primarily spoken and handwritten. The jest was reprinted many times in the form of broadside ballads. A broadside ballad is a single sheet with a printed story and usually the stamp of a wood block carving. One of these ballads had the famous story of the quarterstaff fight between Robin and Little John. The fight happened on a bridge, with Little John being the victor in most tellings. The minstrel, Alan a Dale, is introduced in a broadside ballad. From there, he becomes part of the legend. In the 18th century, the story takes a bit of a turn. Now, Robin only seems to be able to get the better of the luckless sheriff of Nottingham. Everyone else seems to be able to get the better of Robin. When Robin loses, he uses cunning to be able to blast his horn and call forth his merry men. Then he seems to make two choices: invite them to join his merry band, or drink with them till they are drunk, then rob them. In the 18th and 19th century, if the ballads were printed as a whole, they were printed and sold as chapbooks, aimed at the poor. The broadside ballads depicting Robin Hood also appeared in criminal biographies and histories of highwaymen. In 1765, one man took it upon himself to compile the earlier ballads and plays into one book. This was Thomas Percy, and his book is Relic of Ancient English Poetry. The next person to do this was Joseph Ritson. In 1795, with his book Robin Hood, a collection of all the ancient poems, songs, and ballads now extant relative to that celebrated outlaw. He included even more of the earlier works, including Robin Hood and the Potter being the first person to put this one in print. His works opened up the ability for others to create stories, plays, and movies using their imaginations. Ritson also introduced the modern concept of robbing from the rich to give to the poor. He also widely believed and researched the possibility of Robin being based on a real person. The belief that a historical figure could genuinely stand up against tyranny in the interests of the common people. Ritson believed that Robin lived during Richard I's reign, having been born in Locksley of Nottinghamshire. He would have been born in 1160 and died in November 1249 at the age of 87. The man, Robert Fitzooth, fit this. He was in support of his claim of Robin Hood. The decades after Ritson wrote his works, others would compile the ballads as well, including some ballads that Ritson missed. In 1858, Francis James Child published his books, English and Scottish Ballads, which included a volume grouping all the Robin Hood ballads. He also included ballads that only made reference to Robin or only had his name in it, but weren't necessarily about him. His collection included 305 ballads, of which 38 were alternate versions of the story. Robin Hood for the kids. While kids probably read the Robin Hood ballads and later works, the story was not primarily written with them in mind. The first adaptation for children was produced in 1820, a children's edition of Ritson's Robin Hood collection. A very popular version, written with children in mind, is Howard Pyle's The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. Oddly enough, this is the version I'm currently reading, and in this version, Robin is clearly defined as a philanthropist who takes from the rich to give to the poor. While King Richard is mentioned in passing, Robin takes no stance against Prince John. Robin is classified as a yeoman in this rendition. While I'm not very far into the book, I am finding it to be a good read. In 1993, a previously unknown manuscript of 21 ballads ended up at an auction house. From there, it eventually ended up in the British Library. These are the Forester's manuscript and appear to have been written in the 1670s. These are apparently different from the ones in Child's work, with 9 of them being longer and more elaborate than the versions found in the Broadside Ballads. 4 of these are the earliest known versions of the story. A fun fact about the books: in 1953, the state of Indiana banned Robin Hood from being in the schools, in their school books, for curriculum, or in the reading books. It was banned because of the communist connotations. This prompted college students to start the Green Feather Movement protest. Robin Hood moves to the silver screen. In 1938, the film The Adventures of Robin Hood, starring Errol Flynn as Robin and Olivia de Havilland as Maid Marian, portrayed Robin as a hero on national scale. Apparently, this portrayal was so profound that studios created a son for Robin Hood just to create movies about the story without competing with the image of Robin Hood the movie portrayed. Apparently, Disney didn't get this menu, as the next major motion picture about Robin Hood is the 1973 animated classic we all know and love. In this rendition, Robin is portrayed as a cunning fox with his adversary, the Sheriff of Nottingham, as a wolf, and Prince John as a lion. The film has all the classic characters, with the added cuteness of them being animals. The next rendition of Robin Hood contains some very well-known famous actors. In 1976, the movie Robin and Marian appears, with actor Sean Connery as Robin Hood and the lovely Audrey Hepburn as Maid Marian. In the 1980s, the movie industry's Screen Actors Guild sets a standard that all movies must cast a person from other nations, Black, Native American, Chinese, or other nationality, that is not white. With this, an Arab Muslim character was created to join the Merry Men and be part of the Robin Hood story. Think Ah Sneeze and his son Ah Chew from Robin Hood and Men in Tights. 1963 to 1966, France produced and aired a Robin Hood television broadcast. This television broadcast also aired in Canada, Poland, Australia, and the Netherlands. At this time, there was no written version of Robin Hood in French. It wasn't until 2017 when Jonathan Trocco edited and translated the original ballads and plays, including medieval works, into French. Robin Hood, the man's possible existence. There are actually several men over history who could have attributed to the Robin Hood legend. We're going to take a look at a few who come close. The name Robert or Robin is interchangeable in this time period, and both names are used in some cases for the same person. This was also a common name of the time. Hood stood for 2 things: the person's job as a hooder, the maker of hoods or hats, or as an outlaw. Hood is also a common name for the time. The first person we are going to look at is Robert Hood of York. He lived during the reign of Richard and was an outlaw. He became an outlaw by owing money to the church. Because he was an outlaw, his name was changed to Robert Hood, and he is the only known Robin Hood that was an outlaw. The next person is Robert Dayville and his brother John Dayville. The 2 brothers, along with 2 other siblings, went off to fight in a battle. This happened on the Isle of Ely, and they disagreed with things. They led a rebellion during the Second Barons' War. The siblings sought refuge in a forest and led the faction from there during the Battle of Evesham. In the aftermath of the battle, there's mention of a Robert Hood, and while John was eventually pardoned for his actions, Robert is not mentioned as ever getting a pardon. The exploits of the siblings while in the forest closely resemble the story of Robin Hood. Then there are 2 men who may have been the same: a Robert Hood, who lived in the city of Wakefield. Robert is believed to have been part of a rebel group working with the Earl of Lancaster. The rebel group was defeated by King Edward II. From here, the second man appears, a Robin Hood who is employed by the king to work as a bodyguard. It is believed that after the defeat, Robert is pardoned by the king and offered employment. His name was changed to Robin when he became employed. It is also possible the term Robin Hood was just used as an alias for thieves and outlaws. Robin Hood has no mythological standing. He is merely based on legend. All his exploits and skills are those that were possible by a living man. Of course, there is also the fact he may have been based on a living person and historical events. The locations of Robin Hood: Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire. Nottinghamshire, Robin Hood is on the flag and has been there since 2011. Yorkshire, where the man Robin Hood was born and lived, believably. Robin Hood, living in Locksley, wasn't his first home. This was set in the 16th century. Before this, he was believed to be from Barnesdale. At Kirklees Priory, there is a grave with an inscription that relates to Robin Hood. This is the conclusion of what we have learned about Robin Hood himself. Now let's take a look at some of the other famous characters from the ballads and stories. First, we have Little John, Robin's companion, his second hand in command of the merry men. He is a huge warrior at over 7 foot tall. He is one of only a handful of consistent characters throughout the ballads and tales. He fought Robin on a tree bridge with quarterstaffs upon their first meeting. After that one duel, Robin invited him to join his band of merry men. He was master of the quarterstaff. Friar Tuck, a jovial friar common in the May Games, most commonly depicted as a fat, balding monk. His first meeting with Robin involves a battle of wits, in which the loser has to carry the other across the river. He tossed Robin in the river, and so Robin invited him to join his band of merry men. Will Scarlet, in some of the earliest battles along with Little John, not sure how he came to join the group of merry men, helps capture a knight, Richard at the Lee, who Robin lends money. Will laughs at Little John for paying to clothe the knight, which costs nothing, and it's the price he finds funny. The band give the knight 400 pounds, 3 yards of every colored cloth, a horse, a saddle, and then Will insists to give him boots as well. Alan a Dale, a relatively late addition to the legend. He is a wandering minstrel. Robin saves his love from an unwanted marriage to an old knight. Then he, or Friar Tuck, marries Alan to his bride and joins Robin and his band. Much the Miller's Son. He appears as some of the oldest ballads. He is one to help capture the knight and is the one to insist they give him a horse. Maid Marian. She was a beautiful and loyal and commanded respect of Robin's men. For her courage and independence, she came into the story later into the 1600s. She is one of the early strong female characters in English literature. She started as a character in the May Games. She mostly seems to accompany Friar Tuck as part of the story, but always seems to end up with Robin. Originally, she was a shepherdess, but she has been a handmaiden and a highborn woman as well. King Richard the Lionheart. Richard I was born September 8th, 1157, and died on April 6th, 1199. He had a reputation as a great military leader, and he was the King of England from 1189 until his death in 1199. Prince John. He was born December 24th, 1166, and died on October 19th, 1216. He was King of England from 1199 to 1216. He attempted a rebellion against his brother King Richard while Richard was away in the crusade. He was unsuccessful at the time, but was proclaimed king when Richard died. Sir Guy of Gisborne gets killed by Robin even though he was sent to kill him. becomes a romantic rival to Robin Hood for Maid Marian's love, but mostly he is the only man that Robin kills. The Sheriff of Nottingham, depicted as an unjust tyrant and Robin's main antagonist. He mistreats the people of Nottinghamshire, subjecting them to unaffordable taxes. The Sheriff of Nottinghamshire was appointed by the king, responsible for law enforcement. The post was not an official title until 1449. He hunts down Robin and his men because in some stories, just to help keep trade routes safe and for poaching the king's deer. In other stories, the more personal reason of Robin having killed his relative, the Guy of Gisborne. And that is all for Robin Hood. I hope you have enjoyed this story and listening to me say it. I know I messed up on a few places, but that is bound to happen. So thank you for coming along on this adventure with us into the world of Robin Hood.